My name is Ava Mercer, founder of Atlas Risk Intelligence. And tonight, I drove up to my Colorado mountain lodge for Christmas Eve. I planned nothing heroic, just a blanket, a fire, and mercy of quiet after a year of triaging other people's crises. This place is where I exhale, where the world has to wait. The front door wasn't locked at all. Inside, music thumped, lights flashed, and strangers laughed like they paid the mortgage. My sister, Brianna Cole, lifted one of my vintage glasses, my gift to her last year, its rim stained with wine from my cellar. She looked at me and said, "What's a parasite like you doing here?" I told her to call the police. I wanted witnesses. When the sirens finally cut through the mountain quiet, the laughter inside faltered. Two officers, Patel and Ruiz, stepped into the lodge, their boots crunching over spilled ice and broken ornaments. The warmth of the fire couldn't disguise the tension. It clung to every surface. Patel's eyes moved from me to Brianna, then to the chaos that had replaced my home. Brianna spoke first, her voice trembling but loud enough for the room. She said I'd stormed in drunk and ruined their family's holiday. Derek stood behind her, nodding as if rehearsed. Officer Ruiz turned to me, asking for my version. And I told them this was my property, no trip. No invitation. Just a break-in disguised as a Christmas party. I opened my briefcase and handed Patel the deed, the property tax receipts, and a copy of the access log from the smart lock system. The officers examined them under their flashlights, their expressions cooling as the truth settled in. Brianna scrambled, pulling a crumpled page from her bag, a printed holiday authorization email Derek had drafted. Unsigned. No timestamp. No validity. It fluttered in her shaking hands like a last lie. The room split in silence. Officer Ruiz asked the only question that mattered: did I want them removed? My gaze caught the mantel, where my parents' photo had been shoved aside for a smiling portrait of Derek's family. That was the moment something inside me hardened. I said yes. Every one of them needed to leave. Brianna's face drained of color, then flushed with disbelief. She tried to argue, claiming family ties gave her rights. But Patel only shook his head. Blood isn't a lease, he said flatly. The word trespassing hung in the air like a verdict, and no one dared speak again. Brianna's outrage turned to pleading, but I had already made my choice. I took my phone from my coat pocket, the glow of the screen catching every anxious face in the room. My fingers moved steadily as I opened my financial dashboard, the same one that had funded years of their excuses. This time, it would be the instrument that ended them. I began with her apartment, the one she lived in for the price of maintenance alone. At market rate, it was worth $2,500 a month, a discount I had justified as a family gesture. I pressed one button, ending the subsidy and restoring full rent to the management system. The notification chimed, a clean, emotionless sound that made Brianna's breath hitch. Next came the SUV, the one Derek claimed was essential for his parents' hospital visits. The car loan was in my name. Their payments had been nothing but hollow promises. I accessed the finance company's portal and canceled my authorization. Tomorrow morning, repossession would begin. The soft sound of confirmation filled the room again, louder this time against the silence. Officer Patel watched quietly, perhaps realizing this wasn't rage, it was math. I looked at Derek's parents, whose guilt was now painted across their faces. I helped you find your apartment. I co-signed it, and I never charged a fee, I said evenly. I did that because I believed stability might save your son. Lorna lowered her gaze, and Gerald nodded once, ashamed. When it was done, I powered off my phone and set it on the table. The fire popped behind me. The only sound that dared to exist? I had spent years buying peace with generosity, thinking it made me kind. Tonight, I learned it only made me complicit. By the time the officers escorted them out, the snow had thickened to a steady white curtain. Derek's parents apologized again, their voices trembling with humiliation. While Gerald promised to drive everyone home to avoid a drunk driving charge, Brianna tried one last desperate plea. But Officer Ruiz warned her that any more resistance would lead to an arrest for obstruction. The final thud of the door closing left behind only the crackle of the fire and the faint scent of spilled wine. That night, I filed quiet digital traces of everything that had happened. The smart lock log was uploaded to my records, along with photos of the damage and an incident note for my insurer. I also sent a short report to the utility provider. Derek had attempted to transfer the lodge's service accounts into his own name, an act that might seem petty but counted as falsification under Colorado law. I didn't do it out of vengeance, but because I refused to leave a single loose end. By dawn, the house was silent again, yet the echo of their laughter still seemed trapped between the walls. I walked through the living room, past the wrecked coffee table and the tilted family portrait they had displaced. Every item I set upright felt like reclaiming a fragment of my own dignity. When I finally sat down by the fire, the exhaustion was heavier than satisfaction. What they mistook for cruelty was simply consequence, and consequence always arrives on time. Within a week, the first domino fell. An email arrived from the finance company with a photo of the white SUV being towed from a snowy roadside. The subject line read, "Repossession, completed." I deleted it without hesitation. The same way one deletes spam, no anger, no satisfaction, just closure. Days later, the property management firm contacted me. Brianna and Derek had missed their rent payment, and all calls to their listed numbers went unanswered. I gave the standard instruction issue, a payment demand. Then an eviction notice under the lease agreement. The manager hesitated, knowing the tenants were family, but I ended the conversation before empathy could dilute procedure. Compassion had an expiration date, and theirs had passed. The following Friday night, my phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. For reasons I can't explain, I answered. It was Brianna, her voice thin and quivering. She accused me of ruining their lives, saying Derek's parents treated her like a burden now, that she couldn't bear the humiliation. I listened in silence, the fire beside me steady and calm, until her words began to blur into excuses I'd heard too many times before. Then, in the background, Aman's voice erupted Derek's, raw with fury. The argument grew loud enough that I didn't need to imagine the scene. Their chaos spilled through the line, every accusation sharper than the last, until a crash ended the call. I placed the phone face down on the table and let the silence return. The collapse had begun, precise and predictable, like clockwork gears turning exactly as designed. 2 weeks after that call, Brianna reached out again. Her message was softer this time, trembling with a new plea. She said she might be pregnant, that she needed a little more time before the eviction went through. Her voice cracked as she said it, like she believed those words could buy her a reprieve. For a moment, I felt something shift inside me, not pity, but caution. I had spent years listening to her tears reshape the truth, and I wasn't about to let another vague story undo my resolve. I asked her for a medical verification, a dated document from a licensed clinic. She hesitated, then sent a blurry photo of a pregnancy test, its faint line almost invisible against the plastic. It was a performance I'd seen before, built for sympathy, not proof. I told her that until she submitted verified documentation, the eviction would continue as outlined by contract. The silence that followed felt longer than it was. Then came the accusation I had expected, that I was heartless, that I was punishing an unborn child. I stayed quiet until she ran out of words, then said calmly that responsibility and motherhood couldn't exist on borrowed money. That night, I prepared an email to the local housing assistance network. I gave them Brianna's contact and a short note explaining her situation. With no judgment attached, she would receive guidance, options, and shelter, just not at my expense. As I hit send, I realized how strange real mercy can feel when stripped of sentiment. Compassion, I learned, isn't about saving someone from the consequences they created. It's about stepping aside so they can finally meet them face to face. The final piece of the puzzle revealed itself one quiet morning as I reviewed security logs from the lodge. A digital receipt caught my attention, an automatic notification from a booking platform I hadn't used in years. It listed a 3-night stay under a stranger's name, dated just days before Christmas Eve. My stomach tightened as I opened the attachment and saw time-stamped photos taken from inside my home. There they were, Derek's handwriting on the listing description, Brianna smiling in the reflection of a mirror, guests drinking from my glassware. They had turned my private lodge into a short-term rental without my consent, profiting from the property while I was supposedly abroad. I scrolled through the evidence in disbelief, the kind of disbelief that comes when betrayal evolves from greed into audacity. They hadn't just squatted, they'd monetized the invasion. I spent the next hour documenting everything. The booking screenshots, calendar syncs, payment transfers, and even the metadata from the images Derek had uploaded. By the time I was done, my evidence folder looked like an audit file. I submitted a formal complaint to the platform for fraudulent listing, attached every proof, and then forwarded copies to my attorney for a civil recovery claim. I didn't need revenge. I needed a paper trail. Later that afternoon, I instructed my accountant to issue a damage invoice for cleaning, property depreciation, and lost asset value on the opened wine collection. I knew it would reach them before the week ended. As I shut my laptop, a strange calm replaced my anger. Brianna once said I didn't know how to live like family. Maybe she was right. Family forgives. I document, preserve, and file. And in this family, only one of us learned the cost of paperwork. The backlash came sooner than I expected. A notice from the county office arrived, informing me that an anonymous complaint had been filed, accusing me of operating an unlicensed short-term rental and committing tax evasion. The irony was almost poetic. Brianna and Derek had used my own evidence trail as a weapon, twisting it into a claim that I had been profiting illegally from the lodge. It was their last attempt to rewrite the narrative before it consumed them. I met with the investigator the next morning, my records already organized in a binder. Every transaction was traceable, every payment documented through my registered company. My CPA confirmed the lodge was classified as a private residence, not a commercial listing, and that no taxable income had ever been reported from short-term rentals. I handed over the exact proof that dismantled their accusation screenshots of Derek's account tied to the fraudulent listings. The county official closed the folder and gave a small nod. The complaint was dismissed within 48 hours, and an internal note was filed naming Derek Vaughn as the probable source of the false report. By then, Derek's employer had already received a copy of the investigation record. They opened an ethics review for misuse of business credentials and intentional misrepresentation. I didn't gloat when I read that notice. I didn't need to. Their counterattack had backfired with the precision of gravity, predictable and irreversible. Brianna and Derek wanted to prove that I was the parasite feeding off others. Instead, They exposed the only truth that ever mattered. Parasites can't survive when the host stops feeding them. The courthouse was colder than the mountain air outside. When I took my seat before the civil judge, Brianna and Derek sat across from me, their attorney whispering furiously in their ears. They looked smaller than I remembered, their confidence stripped down to nervous glances and clenched hands. I placed my folder on the table, the same one that had followed this entire ordeal like a shadow. The hearing moved quickly because the evidence spoke louder than any accusation. I submitted the property deed, the smart lock entry logs, time-stamped security footage, and copies of the fraudulent rental listings under Derek's name. The attorney for the opposing side tried to discredit the data, suggesting manipulation, until the judge asked if they had counterproof. They didn't. The silence that followed was the most expensive pause of their lives. Then came the question about Brianna's alleged pregnancy, her final emotional defense. The judge requested medical verification, but none had been filed before the deadline. The case file marked it as unsubstantiated. Brianna's face turned pale, her voice trembling, as she admitted she wasn't sure anymore. Derek's eyes darted away, the weight of embarrassment crushing what little defiance they had left. The judgment was clear: they were to compensate me for cleaning, damaged property, and legal fees, along with rental value for the duration they unlawfully occupied the lodge. The order also included a 12-month restraining clause, preventing them from approaching the property. As the gavel struck, a faint echo filled the courtroom. Final. Absolute. I gathered my documents, nodded to the clerk, and walked out without looking back. Some victories don't feel triumphant. They feel quiet, measured, like the moment justice simply takes its rightful seat. By spring, the consequences had fully matured. Brianna and Derek were evicted from their apartment after failing to make restitution, their SUV long since repossessed. Friends who once envied their lifestyle now avoided them. Unwilling to be pulled into the wreckage, she left me one last voicemail, accusing me of cruelty. Her voice hollow from defeat, I deleted it without listening twice. Derek didn't escape either. His employer completed the ethics review and quietly demoted him to a non-client-facing role. No bonus, no commission, no chance of promotion. The man who once relied on charm to borrow credibility now had nothing left to leverage. Their marriage, already splintered, cracked completely under the weight of shared failure. Gerald and Lorna retreated into silence. Ashamed of what their son had done, they downsized to a smaller home and cut off financial ties, admitting to mutual friends that generosity without accountability had destroyed their family. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my own peace. I replaced the locks at the lodge, rehung my parents' photo above the fire, and donated the court's compensation to a local foundation supporting women's independence. People called it poetic, maybe even performative. But I didn't do it for show. The truth was simpler. I wanted the money that once enabled dependency to fund something better. Justice isn't always loud or cinematic. It's sometimes just paperwork, patience, and peace. And in the end, no one walked away untouched. Some nights, I still think about the word Brianna threw at me: parasite. It used to sting, but now I understand it differently. Parasites can only exist when someone keeps feeding them, and I had been the willing host for too long. Setting boundaries wasn't cruelty, it was survival dressed in clarity. A week after the judgment, I received 2 messages that marked the real ending. The booking platform confirmed Derek's account was permanently banned for property fraud, closing the door on their little enterprise. Then my attorney forwarded a letter from Derek himself, a voluntary settlement payment attached, an admission of wrongdoing meant to soften his professional record. It was the quietest confession I'd ever seen. I stood by the lodge window that evening, watching the snow melt into glassy streams down the mountain. For the first time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Justice hadn't been loud or vengeful. It had been meticulous, deliberate, and absolute. I wasn't cutting off family. I was cutting off the foreline they'd mistaken for love. And when peace finally arrived, it came with the same stillness that starts a new season. Thank you for watching till the end. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Share it with someone who still believes kindness can't be broken, and tell me where you're watching from. Your voice keeps our stories alive.